there for the people most in need, like the $1,000 an hour consultants over at McKinsey, a company that received over $100 million for work that public servants say was of little or no value. The total amount this government is spending on high-priced consultants, $15 billion. That is $1,000 for every single family in Canada. No wonder Canadians are eating increasingly at food banks after 8 years of this government. No wonder seniors can't keep the heat on. Why won't they give us an answer? How much did McKinsey get in total?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, and I remember in my time in opposition looking at the member opposite who sat in a government that had a poverty rate of 14.5%. And you know how often they talked about poverty or people in food banks? Never. And in fact, what has happened under this government is that rate has been reduced by 56%. We have lifted literally over 1.5 million people out of poverty. And I would point out that under the worst period of growth since 1946, which his government presided over, that this government in turn has seen more than 1.5 million jobs created since they left office.
Well, there they go. Telling Canadians, stop all your complaining. You've never had it so good. If you're one of the 1.5 million people eating at a food bank, stop your complaining. You've never had it so good. If you're one of those people going to a food bank seeking help with suicide, which is becoming increasingly common, they tell you, you've never had it so good. If you're one of the 35-year-olds living in your parents' basement because this government's policies have doubled rent and doubled mortgage payments, they tell you you've never had it so good. Why? Because they're spending all their time with McKinsey consultants. How much did those consultants get from taxpayers?
Mr. Speaker, when the world is going through something incredibly difficult, you have a choice of what you can do. You can look them in the eyes and tell them straight that they're in the most difficult time that humanity has gone through since the Second World War, or you can retweet what's going wrong in the world and make YouTube videos. It's time for serious leadership. And you know what's happened over the last 8 years? Every time we put concrete solutions in place, the party opposite has obfuscated. They tried to block on support for dental, on support for rental, on support for childcare, on support for OAS, Mr. Speaker.
And now their second tactic. First, they tell Canadians they've never had it so good. Now they admit that it's miserable, but it's everyone else's fault. The rest of the world did not raise the rent in Canada. Rental rates are set here. We don't import our apartment buildings from Russia. We build them here in Canada. We don't set mortgage rates in Russia. We set them here in Canada. And after $500 billion of inflationary deficits bidding up goods and constant red tape preventing the construction of the homes we need, our young people are stuck in their parents' basements. Why don't they stop blaming everyone else and finally take responsibility for the misery they've caused?
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite had an opportunity to be in government and to do something on poverty. They didn't have any targets. They didn't talk about poverty. They didn't talk about homeless shelters. They didn't move those at all. And I've talked about what this government has done. But the IMF is now saying Canada will have the second highest GDP growth in the world. And the reality is that as we work hard to lift Canadians up and do critical things like childcare and dental care, instead of just amplifying anxiety and fear, why won't they be part of the solution? And I would say, Mr. Speaker, they haven't been in this House. All they've done is block and obstruct real solutions.
Now, their third tactic. First, they say everything's great. Then they say it's terrible, but it's everyone else's fault. Then they say we should stop talking about how miserable people's lives are. He seems to suggest that people are anxious because I'm telling them that they can't afford food. No, their stomachs are telling them that they can't afford food. They seem to think that if I stop talking about the fact seniors in Northern Ontario can't heat their homes because of the carbon tax, that seniors won't notice that they're cold. They seem to think that if I don't talk about the 35-year-old living in his parents' basement, he won't realize that he's living there. Mr. Speaker, why don't they fix the problems instead of telling people to shut up about them?
We are plain and straight about the difficult times that we're going through as a planet. And I would suggest that when the member opposite had the opportunity to suggest, as an example, how people dealt with inflation, he recommended cryptocurrency. this is a party, Mr. Speaker, that at every opportunity is actually not offering any solutions, and in fact ignoring the fact that when they had a chance to act on poverty, when they had a chance to act on creating jobs, they had such a bad record on GDP. There was 14 times in history where there was more growth in a single year than they had in their entire government.
After 8 years of this Prime Minister, Canadians have doled out $15 billion for consultants, and in return they get chaos at airports, growing immigration backlogs, and 40-year highs in inflation. Our constituents have skipped meals, they've visited food banks in record numbers, and they reel from liberal inflation-driven interest rate hikes. They've spent Canadian tax dollars on giveaway to well-connected insiders, and they blame everyone else. But after 8 years, there's no one to point fingers at anymore. When will the Prime Minister stop the giveaways to his friends and start working for ordinary Canadians?
Conservatives are very quick to point to the government every time they think there's a political opportunity for themselves. What we're focused on doing in the meantime is advancing solutions. Solutions that have put more money in the pocket of low-income renters, which they voted against. Solutions like making sure that kids who come from low-income families can go to the dentist, which they voted against. This has been the pattern since the very day we formed government. When we stopped sending childcare checks to millionaires to put more money in the pockets of 9 out of 10 Canadian families, they voted against it. When we raised taxes on the wealthiest 1% so we could cut them for the middle class, they voted against it. Every step of the way, we've been focused on families. It'd be nice if they finally support one of these measures.
We brag about the billions spent, but the call is coming from inside of the House. It's been 8 years, and this Prime Minister has doubled the national debt. The price of a house has doubled, and now he's going to triple the carbon tax for the millions of people struggling to pay their now $2,000 rent, their higher mortgage rates, millions using food banks. The Prime Minister has one message for you, and that's that you've never had it so good. It's true for his friends like McKinsey and we and the foodie media firm and their besties who do media training, but it's not true for anyone else. How do they let this happen?
Speaker, it's not just the Conservatives who have questions. New Democrats have questions too. And it's not just McKinsey. Because while the Liberals have awarded $160 million to McKinsey with this 100-year deal, companies such as McKinsey and Deloitte, Mr. Speaker, Deloitte, who has 10 times the amount of money, along with KPMG, are raking in billions of taxpayer dollars without accountability or transparency. Canadians deserve to know exactly who is making decisions for this government, how much they're getting paid, and who in this Liberal government are they connected to. Will this government commit to extending their review to include all of their outsourcing contracts?
As the member well knows, Canada has a reputation around the world as having the highest degree of excellence in the way that it conducts its business and contracts. That is something that we are deeply proud of. I understand that in opposition that you want to foment issues, but I say there is an excellent opportunity in committee to ask these questions directly, and if members want to have real answers, then there'll be the opportunity for mature, reasonable discussions at that period of time. But talking down the way in which we conduct contracts does not behoove